What are you saying, people? We're back. I told you, see? I told you it was like quick. But yeah, we're back for another episode of The Social Worker and the Mentor. So look, my old lecturer is still here. And look who we have. She's been on the podcast before. So can you introduce yourself without saying where you work? Introduce yourself.
I always have to be careful because I feel like I might slip.
Yeah.
But I will try not to. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Narges. I've been on the podcast with Nana before, and Nana has also been my manager before.
Can you imagine? Do you know what's so funny, yeah? Before I became your manager, you came on the podcast, and then I became your manager, now you've come on the podcast after.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's
and then
mad.
Now, my lecturer, please introduce yourself again, please.
Hello, I'm Tanya Moore. I'm currently Principal Social Worker in Essex County Council. Am I allowed to say that?
Yeah, of course.
Previously, been a lecturer, been in and out of academia for the last few years, but back in practice now, which is where I belong.
All right, let's clap for yourself. Clap for yourself. Right. So I'm so glad, Naz, you've actually joined us here today, and Tanya, you're still. It's because I want to talk about this book. If you can show the people the camera, book. This currently right now is buzzing in the world of social work. I'm seeing it everywhere. So talk about the book. Naz, talk about the book. Let's start with yourself.
So, Tanya, do you want to introduce the book?
I'll introduce the book.
Yeah.
I'll say this is the second in a series of 2 books. And the first book, The Anti-Racist Social Worker, was published, I can't remember, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, can't quite remember. And it came together after George Floyd was murdered and we were in COVID, and there was a lot of conversation across social work online. Probably it really took the online discussion up quite a notch, didn't it? And for the first time, I think we began to have good, open conversations about the existence of racism in social work, acknowledging that there's a good deal of racism in social work and thinking, what are we all doing to recognise the racism and respond to it?
Yeah.
It was a really important time for social work, I think. And out of that came a book, The Anti-Racist Social Worker, where social workers from up and down the country were talking about what racism meant to them and why anti-racism and being anti-racist was so important to them, and talking about what they were doing and the steps they could take to be more anti-racist in practice, to be actively anti-racist in practice. That was a really important book at the time. It went down really well, got a lot of attention, and that was fantastic. But what the book didn't do, the book talked about anti-racist activism and the responsibility on each of us to not be a bystander, but to stand up, to respond to what we see, to call it out. But what it didn't do is talk about how in our practice we can be actively anti-racist, and to get us thinking about how racist structures are drawn into the way we work in social work in a more explicit way. And that's what this book does. So what we wanted to do was say, it's all very well talking about racism in social work. We all know that racism exists. We all know that we don't want to see it there. We want to do something about it. And this book is a collection of stories that tells us what we can do. It's very proactive. So each chapter is a story of a different aspect of social work. And it concludes with, to be more anti-racist in this element of practice, you can do this.
Knox?
Yeah. On from that.
Yeah. Come on.
That was a really good introduction.
Yeah,
it was a really good introduction, and it actually summarises everything that this book is about. So my chapter 6, page 47, focuses about fostering and the discrimination that I faced as a foster carer, as a Muslim foster carer. And, you know, when a little backstory, how I know Namal Jude, one of the co-editors, she was my mentor during COVID.
Right.
So when I first went into practice, in my first year into practice, ASYE, because of COVID and because of the fact that there was new workers working essentially virtually, not doing home visits and things like that, I was part of a social work group, wider social work group, where ASYEs were connected to mentors, and I was matched with Namal Jude, and that's how I know Namal.
Right.
And she was such an amazing mentor at such a crucial point in practice for me,
Mm.
because it was an isolating experience. And so that's how Namal knows me, and that's how she reached out to me. And although I wasn't part of the first book, I actually came to the first book's launch,
Oh.
and I was there to support everyone. I met amazing people that have contributed to this second version of the book as well. And so it's an honor to kind of be part of that collective and be part of the second chapter in the book, where I can write my little piece.
What has been the responses from social workers across the country in terms of the book? Because when I was looking through, there's lots of people who I know and who I've met in person. But what's been the responses since the book has now come out from social workers? Has it been finally we're talking about it, or how's the responses been, Tanya? No, how's it been?
Do you know what? One of my young people said, "You wrote a chapter about anti-racism," and I was like, "Yeah, because I face racism too." And she was like, "You do?" So I've had a mixture of responses. I think a lot of the time the response that I get is people look at me and they don't think that racism exists in my space.
Yeah.
But actually it really does. And when I've mentioned it to my work managers and place of work, they're all in awe that I'm able to talk about it, and I'm able to write about it. And I've had my manager purchase the book and congratulate me and support me on it. So we're still promoting it, I would say, but we've so far had so much of a positive feedback, and we've only done the book launch last night. Yesterday evening.
I saw on social media. I did.
So that's the first time we've gotten together as co-authors and editors to kind of come and meet each other and get a snapshot of who wrote what piece and put a face to the name. And it was really beautiful.
It was a lovely evening, wasn't it? We'd all been email pals until then, and suddenly we got to meet in person.
How important is it, just coming from the book, that social workers are a lot more comfortable now speaking about racism? Because I think one of the things that I have seen, particularly doing this platform, is that there are many social workers, and I've spoken about it before with Rob, many social workers who have spoken around the fact that actually they have experienced racism, and I think Tanya, you said it, within the profession, and at times when they've tried to raise it within local authorities, it hasn't actually been dealt with. So how important is it that we're now vocal to say, you know what, we know as a profession we're meant to practice an anti-discriminatory, anti-oppressive practice, but actually it exists. Is it a voice for us now to start being a lot more vocal, and for leaders to start taking it a bit more seriously within our profession and the impact it's going to have on the people we work with?
You know what, Nana, we can't change it until we know how to see it and we have the courage to talk about it. So we can't talk about it enough. I think that, so I can only speak from the perspective as a white social worker, I think we're better at seeing it. I think we're better at that. I think we've still got a long way to go. I think that I can still find myself in situations where I'll reflect back and think, I could have done better there. You know what? I didn't see that. I didn't get the experience of the other person in the room there. I didn't fully understand that. I didn't see it. So we can all do more, but the doing more has to be backed up by some kind of support on what to do about it. And I think that's where this book is really important. So we're learning how to see, we're building the confidence to articulate and say what we see. And the next bit is, and what do we do about it? How can we change our practice?
What I wanted to ask you both, so what is kind of like the next phase now? I know you're still promoting it. What's the next phase now with this? Where is it that all the authors now want to go and take it? What's the next phase?
I think we all want to take it in different directions. We all have our own niggling little ideas, and it's crazy how it's just taking its own shape and everyone's doing their own little bit to it. But I really feel like this book is about, I know I talk a lot about allyship in my chapter and how I found allyship within my environment, my space. And regardless of how difficult the situation was that I was going through at the time, I found people who cared enough to want to listen, to want to give advice, to validate my experiences. And so for me, allyship was like a really big part of what got me through that hard period where I was experiencing discrimination.
Mm.
But I feel like the whole book represents allyship in very different ways. And it described to me, following on from last night, as everyone was reading their chapters, I felt like parts of their chapters, I felt like there was so many stories in between the stories that were being told. And it was such mundane experiences that you wouldn't consider to be pockets of racism, but there were pockets of racism in each story. And it made me feel like everyone in that room, everyone who came to support, were allies. And I write in my part of the book that actually allyship isn't, or racism isn't just as simple as black and white. You know, you can experience racism from people who look like you. And that's what I learned, and that's the part that I found most saddening in my experience. You know, I experienced racism from South Asian people. I experienced a lack of allyship from South Asian people, but I also experienced allyship from white people, from South Asian people. So you can't simply say racism is from this corner of the room or that corner of the room, or it looks like this and it doesn't look like that. No, it looks varied. It's everywhere, and it's we really have to kind of be able to look inwards. And really address that.
I mean, I think that I wonder whether what you're articulating is the internalized racism that so many people who have been subjected to racism feel.
Yeah.
And then that can be expressed as racism against somebody who looks like them.
Absolutely.
And it just says what a big task we have in front of us.
Absolutely.
To unwind that.
Absolutely.
I want to just briefly, because you mentioned earlier, Narges, about the racism you experience. I don't want you to go into too much, because I think the audience and whoever purchases it needs to go and read it. But you mentioned, in terms of racism you experienced being a Muslim social worker as well, could you touch upon that just little briefly, how that was for you, and the impact it may have had on you in terms of when you maybe were deciding to go into social work? How was that for you?
It was definitely a defining moment in my career, because I really thought during that period, because the racism that I experienced and what I write about that experience dragged on for 2 years. It was being assessed and reviewed for about 2 years. And I've been in practice for close to 5 years now. So it was at a very early stage of my career. It was at a time where I was kind of like up and coming in my career. I was finding my feet. I was finding my identity. And I'm not going to lie, I felt as though that this experience would have brought an end to my social work practice. And I always say that my years of being a carer and caring is more significant than my years in practice. So I've been a carer and I've cared for more than I've actually practiced. And that's from my experience of being care experienced, from being a kinship carer, being a mainstream foster carer, and a connected and a special guardian now. So for me, caring has been such an innate part of my identity. And then social work just kind of like enhanced that even more so. So I felt that this experience would have actually brought an end to my social work practice. I really felt that. And it was at a brink of that. And I think what really got me through, like I say, has been my managers, my friends, foster carers, care experienced organisations, Muslim specific fostering organisations. They've been really crucial in kind of helping me find my voice, and helping me utilise my own skills to kind of fight this process that I was going through. And that's been really, really helpful. And actually what stuck with me in this journey was the fact that I had foster carers say to me, Narges, you're a social worker, you're in practice and you're dealing with this in the fostering space. And if social workers can do this to you, one of their own, what chance do the rest of us have?
Yeah.
And that stuck with me, and it made me feel like it wasn't something I can just simply walk away and put on a sideline in order to save my career.
Yeah.
It was a big part of kind of defining the person I was going to be within this space, within my career, and the type of social worker I want to be.
Yeah, no, and I think you're absolutely right, because I think within this profession as well, and I talk a lot about it on the podcast, around the fact that there's a lot of racial inequality that exists within our job role, unfortunately, and that there are professionals who come into this job role with their own biases and the impact that it has on the children, young people and families that we work with. And we see it a lot within a lot of decisions that are being made. And it's why, there are many families who will watch this and will go and say, yes, I've experienced this. And I'm looking at myself as a black male social worker. There's not a lot of black male social workers in social work anyway, as it is. And through my own experiences, having to often speak as a black male on decisions that are being made, and that the cultural and racial elements are not always being considered, and openly saying to, senior management that if we look at black children or Asian children or white children and how certain decisions are made for black children not getting certain resources, white children are, Asian children not get, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think it's also important for us to be open, because although we're practitioners working with families, we also have our own experience as well, in terms of, and I think for me, where I've felt it within career progression. Do you know what I mean? That's where I've kind of felt it, always being told no, white counterparts being told yes, and knowing how important it is for me to actually be in these spaces, and having this podcast here as well, being here with Tanya, being here with yourself, so that families can also go and see that actually, as practitioners, we also do feel it. You feel it because of the decision, but we also do feel it as well. So I think this book is great, and I think it does need to be rolled out. I just want to bring Tanya in, because Tanya, I think one of the I want to ask you, you mentioned about being a white social worker, is that when I've kind of seen a lot of kind of like surveys, a lot of white social workers do find it very difficult to talk about racism. It can be quite uncomfortable. From your experience, how have you been able to kind of navigate that, or speak to fellow white social workers to go and say, we need to talk about this? And I'm not being biased, because you're my lecturer, and in uni you've been very, very, you were always open about talking about racism, being a white female, and that we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. How have you been able to navigate through that as well, from your end, personally? Yeah.
So a lot of we white social workers do find it very difficult to talk about race, because we are concerned that we're going to get it wrong, we're going to use the wrong language, we're going to say the wrong thing, we're going to cause offence, all of these things. And the only message that I have is that we have to be courageous. In fact, there's a chapter about this in the book, that we have to be courageous. We have to have those conversations, because the danger, if we don't, is that we impose our own idea of what's normal onto somebody for whom normal means a very different thing. So what we know is that white is still the dominant culture in the UK. We know that. And if I go in to meet a family and assume that my white background is going to be the normal for them, it's going to go badly wrong for them. I'm going to be assessing and making judgments according to what my worldview looks like, rather than getting alongside and understanding what their worldview looks like. So it just doesn't work. The dominant culture cannot be imposed upon an individual person, upon an individual family. And the longer that we fail to have conversations about identity and culture for each person we meet, each family we meet, the more we're going to continue to do that. And it gets hardened, those dominant preconceptions, they get hardened into policy. We find ourselves, as we do, with policy that's designed for white people and for white families, rather than for the real diversity of the population that we enjoy.
No, I think that's very, very powerful, Tanya, what you said. And I think for social workers, and families who are watching, I think it is very, very important that you hear to what Tanya and Narges have said, it is still very much a difficult topic to speak about. But ultimately, I would encourage universities, families, and also practitioners. When you do see it happening, it is very, 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 very important that you do speak on it, because ultimately, not just about us, but also as well, the families that we're working with are going to be the ones to feel it. And obviously, we're talking as social worker practitioners on the inside who work for adults and for children. So where you have an opportunity to challenge that, if you see injustice, use your voice. And I go back to it, PCF Domain 1, professionalism. It's there. Our Basel Code of Ethics, the very, 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 very first point. I think it's 1.1. You see, I remember these things, you see. It's there. So I'm just saying, for all of you, use your voice within your spaces, whether it's local authority, whether you're children, whether you're adults, use the spaces. So in terms of the book, just to wrap up, where can practitioners find the book? Where is the book? Is it on Amazon? Where's the book at the moment?
Oh, you could buy the book anywhere. Your preferred bookseller, preferably a local bookseller. It'd be amazing to go into a local bookstore and ask them to get the book in for you. Yeah, you can use the wider online booksellers if you prefer, or you can get it directly from the publisher. And if you look on social media at the moment, there is a 20% discount code if you buy directly from the publisher. That's probably the cheapest way to do it right now. But I have a fantasy that social workers are going into their local bookshops and buying from their local bookshop.
Excellent. Well, Narges, Tanya, thank you so much. I'm really glad we actually got to spoke about the book. So people, audience, please, and particularly, social workers, do please buy the book and read it. It's coming from social workers as well. So please read the book, buy it. University lecturers.
Can I just say one thing?
Of course.
Proceeds from the book go to the wonderful Social Workers Without Borders.
Yes. So
who provide pro bono support for asylum seekers.
Exactly, for our US. So please purchase the book. Yeah. Narges and Tanya, thank you so much for coming on. Guys, listen, thank you for tuning into this episode. You know where to find us. You like, subscribe, and you share. And also, just to say, this episode here, I'm saying it right now, this is CPD, yeah? So if you do want to renew, when it comes to Social Work England, this episode here is CPD, because you're hearing from a lecturer, you're hearing from a social worker as well, who's got lived experience, who has been a carer. Everything they've just said, this for me is CPD. So yeah, use it. Yeah. So guys, like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you soon.